far you have come on your own, but never alone. Through the rain and through the shine, here's your moment, it's your time. You stood tall and now you see, standing in your destiny. 100 women growing strong. 100 women where you belong. You stood tall and now you see, you have reached your destiny. Woman, woman.
As people of African descent, we offer this land recognition in solidarity with the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island in the efforts and deliberate intentions toward decolonization. As people of African descent, we acknowledge the land of Turtle Island that sustains us, express deep gratitude to its indigenous peoples, and pledge to honor our dignity and divinity that ultimately connects us all. By Kay Johnson. Welcome to 100 ABC Fireside Chats. 100 Accomplished Black Canadian Women is a bold project initiated by co-authors and co-founders, the Honorable Dr. Jean Augustine, Dr. Denise O'Neill Green, and Donna Jones Simmons. Our mission is to celebrate and archive the professional accomplishments of trailblazing Black women from all across Canada. The goal is to create an ever-expanding database available for current and future generations via print media, public and private libraries, as well as our website, which is www.100abcwomen.ca. In addition to our fireside chats on topics that matter to our communities, such as education, healthcare, entertainment, creative arts, trade union, and so much more, we offer biennial book launching galas and biannual symposiums. The co-authors and co-founders would like to take this opportunity to thank each of you for attending today's fireside chat. We know that you will find these sessions educational and inspirational. So sit back, relax, and hear from our brilliant and talented honorees.
Hello, everybody, and good afternoon. Welcome and happy Black History 365. My name is Nancy Sims, and I'll be supporting the discussion this afternoon. I've worked for over 10 years as a director for human rights at Humber College and currently teach at the University of Toronto Law School and Humber College. Our panel today comprised of three brilliant Black women, Tionda Kerr, Lavinia Latham, and Judge Rochelle Avery. They will be addressing how we, as Black African women, manage a complaint at the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal. It's important to note that we are not providing legal advice. It is a timely topic, and one that I encourage you to text a friend, a family member, co-worker to log in. There is no other public forum offered in Canada to educate us as Black African women on how to navigate our human rights at the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal. Managing a complaint at the tribunal is not intuitive and is often complex. Thanks to the 100 ABC Women for prioritizing Black women and make space to inform us on how best to successfully navigate through what can be a very challenging process. Again, thank you for being here with us and thank you for joining us in community. As the panel moderator, I'll be guiding us through the next 1.5-ish hours. The time will go swiftly. Let me share the path forward. I will briefly share some opening remarks on the topic, followed by introduction of each panelist. We have basically 2 rounds of questions, and I will pose a question to each of the speakers who will answer accordingly. At the end of each round, I will open the floor to enable us to respond to your questions and/or comments between the panelists. We ask you that you place your questions in the chat. The second round of questions to panelists will be ensued by a period of question and answers, and I might do that. I might integrate those questions throughout, depending on time, so bear with me. Finally, I will deliver very quick closing remarks, and I hope that sounds good to you. We're off to a fantastic Sunday afternoon. Let's get started. The Ontario Human Rights Commission was established in the 1960s, I think it was 62. And its purpose is to prohibit actions that harass and/or discriminate against people based on a protected ground in a protected social area. There are 5 social areas: employment and accommodation, as in housing, contracts, goods, services, and facilities, including educational institutions, membership in unions, trade, or professional associations. There are 17 prohibited grounds. These are areas where we ought to be free from harassment and discrimination. I will place them in the chat, but I also want to put them in the space so that they take hold of us. The first 6, you'll notice quite often they get conflated, and oftentimes we misunderstand what they mean. But let's go. Race, ancestry, color, citizenship, ethnic origin, place of origin. Age, creed and/or religion, disability, family status, marital status, including single status, gender identity, gender expression, receipt of public assistance in housing only, record of offenses in employment only, sex, including pregnancy and breastfeeding, and sexual orientation. Currently, the Ontario Human Rights System consists of 3 separate and independent parts or departments for ease of language. One, the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario, which likely you will hear us refer to it as the tribunal. And they decide if someone's human rights have been violated. And this is where your complaint, my complaint, the application is filed. The tribunal will review your application, your complaint, and decide the best way to deal with your situation. It may also decide that your rights have not been violated or that it does not have the power to deal with your case. The Human Rights Legal Clinic helps people to file the application with the tribunal. Sometimes, if staff is available, they will also support you and represent you at the tribunal. Finally, the Ontario Human Rights Commission, just a broad body, works to identify the root causes of discrimination and to bring about broad systemic change to remove them. It develops policies and provides public education, monitors human rights, does research and analysis, and conducts human rights public interest inquiries. One that comes to mind is recently racial profiling. The OHRC may also intervene in human rights cases before the tribunals or courts on broad public interest matters. The current commissioner at the Ontario Human Rights Commission is Chief Commissioner Patricia DeGuire. I do believe that the OHRC are still in consultation phase or might have just wrapped up their meetings with communities in which they're trying to be more effective in responding to anti-Black racism in the education system. I'm hopeful that one of the outcomes will be the modernization of the legal test for discrimination, in particular, race-based discrimination. It is important to note that race-based complaints are the most difficult to prove, and so we are so happy you're here today. And I'm thrilled that we have three very knowledgeable women who will lead us through how best to file and manage a complaint at the tribunal. Finally, and this is really important, it's been my experience that quite often when I support folks at the tribunal, particularly racialized folks, Black people, that we want the people who have hurt us to be punished. And, I think that's just basic human behavior. However, the tribunal is clear that its purpose is remedial, that is, corrective and future prevention. So without much more delay, let me introduce you to our panelists for the afternoon. It is my privilege to introduce to you the three panelists, Tionda Kerr, Lavinia Latham, and Judge Rochelle Avery. Do bear with me as I read their bios. Tionda Kerr has an undergraduate degree in psychology from the University of Windsor. She began her career in gaming in 1994, and for the past 4 years has dedicated her career to social responsibility at Ontario Lottery and Gaming. She has been a leader for over 2 decades and is proud to continuously provide safe spaces for all within corporate Canada. Tionda believes that in her work, service to others is a priority. She's a leader who fights for equity and justice in her day-to-day and believes Black women are the strength and backbone to social justice movements. Welcome, Tionda. Next, I'll introduce you to Lavinia Latham. And Lavinia has successfully represented clients at all levels of courts in Ontario and Canada, including the Supreme Court of Canada, the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, and the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal. Lavinia co-developed and launched an anti-racist leadership course for Catholic Principals Council of Ontario. Lavinia is also a talented and engaging public speaker and has led over 100 equity and human rights training workshops. Lavinia also runs 2 YouTube channels, fine natural hair rocks, yes, and Lavinia Latham, JD. Next, Judge Rochelle Avery is one of 9 citizenship judges in Canada and is currently assigned to the Greater Ontario area, which includes Hamilton, Niagara, Kitchener, Windsor, and London. She's a professor at Mohawk College and an adjunct professor at Queen's Law School. She's also the co-author of Tribunal Practice and Procedures. Rochelle has a degree in criminology from the University of Windsor and a postgraduate certificate in alternative dispute resolution from York University. Judge Avery is deeply committed to community engagement and involvement, serving on various boards and committees in the past, while continuing to lend her knowledge and expertise to advance the needs of community. She and her husband, L. Dean, have 4 children. Thank you. Let's welcome these 3 brilliant women. I am now moving to the first set of questions, and this question is directed to Tionda. What should Black women know in organizations to ensure their rights are not violated?
So many things. Nancy, thank you for that warm welcome. I am in such amazing company. So it's good to be here this afternoon. Thank you all. I think the first thing is that Black women need to know their rights. A quick story, because as you see in my bio, I've been in gaming pretty much my entire adult life. I had, at the time, I was managing our customer service team. So about 120 employees were all reporting into me. And that we had low engagement scores, et cetera, et cetera. And this is Woodbine, so it's in the middle of Rexdale, where this casino is. And this young woman, it's just a bad rep, a young Black woman. She was just unhappy all the time. And so when I came in, I just decided to have these one-on-one conversations with all of the staff to try and figure out, what was happening, what was the low engagement scores for, et cetera, et cetera. Long story short, coming to the end of it, their human rights were being violated almost every day through racism, through the customers. And no one knew what to do because customer service was the first thing. And so the customer's always right. But at the same time, day in and day out, getting all this negative attention towards you, just becoming disengaged every single day. So I think one of the first things to help our employees understand their rights, especially those that work with customers, because I literally told them, I said, it is actually like no one can speak to you that way. I said, I need to know this information so I can have them escorted off the property. It is against the law. And so the first thing we need to do is really understand our rights as employees, what is expected of us. I was saying to Lavinia before we started, I'm taking an employment and labor law course, trying to get my HR certification. Why at this age, I don't know. It is what it is. I am learning so much from that course. And if that knowledge could be imparted into every employee, I think that your corporate Canada would just be a better place to work. So I think first things first, we should educate one another, share our stories, tell us, the way we should be treated as employees. That's one of the first things I'd like to say. Then of course we should read Judge Avery's book. Be a good thing. But I do believe that education is knowledge. Knowledge is power. Power is what will get us where we need to go. I do think as well, Black women need to find their village, for lack of a better place. I'm going on quite a few years now. And I think over the years, if I knew that if I can have that circle of trust follow me through my career, I think I would be in a much better position. I've only recently found my circle, and they also empower you and give you that confidence to, lift your voice, speak up when you feel that you're being treated unfairly. So I do 100% believe that, As Black women, we need to support each other. And especially where I work, there are very few of us with me growing up. Now there's many, many more. I think we opened up the conversation at OLG where I work. Our culture is enhanced as such that we, through education and knowledge and, breaking down our biases, we were able to be more inclusive in our work environment. And as such, we have more of a trusting culture. So people can speak up if they feel that, they've been treated unfairly. So let me run down the list. Knowledge is key. So we should need to know our rights. That's the first place we need to know. What women need to know is they need to find their circle of trust at work, and then try and cultivate that culture of belonging, inclusivity, and trust so that we can, when we feel like we're being violated or we feel that there's a wrong, that it doesn't have to get to the tribunal, that we can settle it within our corporate environment and make sure that others like us aren't treated the same way. And I'll wrap it there.
Thank you so much. Welcome to Lifelong Learning. Question is to Lavinia Latham. And Lavinia, how does systemic discrimination impact the experiences of Black women in Ontario when it comes to accessing justice through the Human Rights Tribunal?
Yes, this is a fantastic question. And it's so nuanced because there's so many moving parts to it. Systemic racism, systemic discrimination is something that is very hard to see with your eyes, right? It's hard to see. It's hard to articulate if you're not a part, and even if you are a part of the community, it's also difficult to articulate. And that makes it all the more difficult to navigate. Now, one of the nuances that I think is the most important is that piece about lived experiences. So there's a very famous Caribbean saying, and I won't attribute it to any island for fear that islands might argue, but it's, he who knows it, he who feels it knows it, right? And so that being the case, so many times there's women, Black women, who say, I've experienced this. I feel like there's a negative energy, or I feel like I can't wear my real hair to, the workplace environment. I feel like I'm being targeted. And when we use that language, it kind of falls on deaf ears because in this Eurocentric society, it's all about objectivity, right? Objectively speaking, what was different about your experience that is not happening to others' experience? And if you can't properly articulate that, you will continue to be a victim of systemic discrimination, systemic racism. Now, how does that apply to the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal? It applies to the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal because there are a lot of individuals who occupy positions of power who lack the lived experience to understand those nuances. And so that really forces the need to have even more individuals who can advocate as, lawyers or advocacy seekers, individuals who are decision makers. So vice chairs sitting in those positions of power, making those decisions, so that they can lean into the understanding of what it's like to walk into a completely Eurocentric environment with a head wrap like I have right now, and get stares, or you get conversations that you're not really trying to be a part of, right? Full disclosure, I'm wearing mine because right now I am in the middle of a deep conditioning session. It works, it's beautiful, and it's perfectly, if I may say so myself, it's perfectly professional. There's nothing wrong with it. However, you walk into a, Eurocentric environment. Oh, your hair looks different. Why are you wearing that? Oh, that's like just conversations that don't necessarily need to be. And, there's a lot of nods on this wonderful panel. And I know in the audience, you might be feeling the same way too, but the question then begs, are others able to understand that? We all know it, we all feel it, but it's hard to articulate. So that's kind of the crux of systemic discrimination, systemic racism, and really trying to understand it, which is the reason why I really love the way the law is currently situated at the Human Rights Tribunal in the sense of the code. It's not intention. So it's never about, I didn't intend to make Lavinia feel badly about her hairstyle choices. It's impact. I felt that way. The human right belongs to me. It belongs to my understanding, my interpretation, and my application, and no one else's. So that's a fantastic place, I think, to end. But thank you so much for that question, Nancy. I really love talking about human rights.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing. And so I'll go to Judge Avery. What are some things that should be taken into consideration when filing a human rights complaint or a wrongful dismissal allegation?
So first of all, I just want to say how happy I am to be part of this group, and just I love to see Black women shine. Yes, it's a beautiful thing. I'm really happy to be here. And so one of the things, so many people don't think that they can file, and they think that they shouldn't bother. And so one of the things that I always say to my students that I teach human rights to, and also to clients when I was practicing, is that you have a responsibility to file, because what we're doing is we're setting the tone for how people will treat us moving forward. And not just us, but Black women, Black people in general. And if we keep swallowing and praying that, somehow they'll get karma to get them, then it doesn't address the fact that it's not okay to treat Black people and Black women this way. But there are still things you need to consider, because as you said, Lavinia, and as you also said, Tianda, do you feel safe in that environment? Do you feel that you can? And while retaliation is something that's not allowed, it can happen. And do you have the ability to withstand that? So really, when you're cultivating your circle of support, trusted individuals within your workplace, it's really important so that you can have the agency to be able to now file, which is what you should do, because it's your right to do so, and you should not be discriminated against because you're exercising your right. And then the other thing you need to think about is what's the best venue. So, you might actually, it might be a better option for you to actually sue and pursue litigation and not necessarily go to the Human Rights Tribunal. Or you could pursue litigation, have the monetary, let's say, component dealt with, and then choose to deal with all the other issues at the Human Rights Tribunal. And that is also something that's available to you to do. And so again, educating yourself about process and what you have the right to do is really fundamentally important. And so whenever I talk to my students about the fact that, well, what is the remedy that you're looking for? If you're looking for reinstatement, if you're looking for, an apology, if you're looking for policies to be written, education and training, the Human Rights Tribunal is a place for you. And so that is really empowering, that people also understand that the remedies that are available to you are very far reaching, and they can be very creative, and they can address the harm that's been caused. And it's very important that people recognize that you can kind of think outside of the box in terms of what those remedies might be and what it is that you need in order to repair the harm that's been caused. It's a very fundamental component. And the other thing that I just want to add as well is just going off of what Lavinia was saying, it's very important to document, because especially complaints related to racism are nuanced and they're not overt, right? We need to ensure that we're documenting. When we say we feel like someone is doing something, we feel like you're saying something about write it down. On such and such a day, this happened. Because sometimes, as Lavinia said, when you're just kind of experiencing it, you don't even realize that you now have a documented regiment of discrimination, that there's actually a substantial amount of information that actually can allow you to have success. And then when we look at decisions like the Peters versus the Appeal Law Association, which says that racism is nuanced, right? It's not overt, and it's a recognition of that. You can utilize that lengthy documentation in order to support the fact that what you're experiencing is nuanced, is particular to you, that they're choosing not to afford you the discretion that they afford to other people. And I think that that's really fundamental. That documentation piece is so very important.
Thank you. Thank you. I wonder if any of the three of you have any questions that you'd like to direct to each other.
Yeah. So, Judge Avery, I have a question, just because, again, I am saying I'm taking this employment and labor law class.
Yes.
That when you're in different jurisdictions in Canada, do we have to consider certain things depending on where you are in all of Canada? Because I'm understanding it under Ontario.
That's
but then,
right.
Yeah, like it's different, right?
Oh, you do. So the first thing is you have to recognize, okay, who's discriminated against? Who is discriminating against you? So if it's a federal body, you're actually supposed to go to the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, right? Well, actually to the commission. There's already problems with that hopefully we can talk about later. but to the commission, who is the gatekeeper, unfortunately. But yes, so if you've been discriminated against by a bank or a federal government entity, then yeah, you're going to the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. But yes, if you're in another jurisdiction, Alberta has its own code, BC has its own code, and so that familiarization with what's available there. Now, the good thing is that Ontario generally is the model, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be completely consistent. And so yes, if you are in a position where you're dealing with individuals who are from various jurisdictions, it requires you to be familiar beyond just what happens in Ontario and in the Ontario landscape. Yeah.
Fantastic. So if I could just add that one of the things I struggle with is the definition of racism. And I struggle with it because it doesn't send a very clear message that racism is a form of violence. And if we were to agree or establish that racism is a form of violence, when we say, I feel, it would be recognized, and I've been pushing for this, because when a woman says, I have been sexually assaulted or harassed, we never question it. And so I'm grappling and have been for years. And wherever I lay my head in an organization, I do push that argument forward that racism is a form of violence and that there's a level of re-traumatization that occurs.
Yes.
And we tell the Black woman that her feelings isn't valid.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
So I just wanted to add that. So I'm walking away with some wonderful things at this moment, and we're just starting out. Find your village circle of trust. Really like that. It's important for us as Black African women to have folks that we can rely on. I often say to my sister is, I'm totally naked before you. I am transparent. You're the only person I will not tell a story to. This is what it is. We've got to find that, right? And divide and rule has worked very effectively. And so we don't trust each other. And so that's something that we all need to work and build on. And then I heard about the lived experiences. And this is what critical race theory would call the unique voice. I have a certain competence to talk about racism because I experience it every day, all the time, everywhere. And then I also heard that it's not about intention, but it's about impact, that the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal is interested in looking on the impact. And so when people say it was not my intention, I get it. And as human beings, we need to acknowledge that, but that doesn't mean that it has not impacted, right? And then what I'm hearing is about reprisal, and that you have I almost want to say you have a duty to seek recourse when you are violated, and that the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal is very clear that reprisal is unacceptable. In fact, it's a form of discrimination, and there's a legal test for it. So I think what we want to leave with at this moment is to acknowledge that if we're being violated, we need to find our voice, we need to respond, we need to access the correct level of resource. It might not be the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal. It might be going through a different arena, legal arena. So thank you so much for that. If there are no other questions or comments among you, can I move on then to the second half of the questioning period? Yes? Fantastic. So that was great. Tionda, why are human rights complaints brought forward to human resources so challenging to settle?
I think we kind of addressed it, right, Nancy? It's like, it's so hard to prove, right? And, you know, Lavinia, you were mentioning it earlier, microaggressions are microaggressions. And so, you know, they add up and we tell ourselves, well, you know, is it enough? Do I have a case moving forward? We second guess ourselves. There's so many different things that pop up into my mind. And I think, you know, having sat in HR for about 3 years, I watched that happen because in our human resource division, they're majority white and white women. And to Lavinia's point earlier, it's their lived experience is not the same as ours. And so it's hard when you're reporting that something happened to you if you don't have the right language, if you don't have the right words to describe what's happening, if you didn't document as we're supposed to, then you're like, it's somebody's word against yours. And then we all feel like we're imposters and what we're saying isn't true because you know, what you're hearing back from your HR is making you second guess what you believed in your mind. And so I find that it's really, really difficult for cases of especially for Black women to express, because not only do we have that discrimination as women, there's that intersection of a woman of color being a Black woman. And then, you know, other different things that comes along with it that are hidden. And I think that, you know, if we don't document and if we don't sort of build a confidence that, you know, I'm feeling this, so it has to be real. And we have to really nurture and curate those relationships so that people can understand that, you know, well, I trust Tionda, so I'm going to take what she says for face value and I'm going to investigate and I'm going to stand behind her and have that allyship and work towards a solution. I was really, really lucky at OLG to get the director of equity, diversity, and inclusion, having been there for so long, so that I was able to tell my story in a way to people who knew who I was from a career perspective, but to understand the experiences that I've had over the years. It was almost like I had that buy-in for other Black women to be heard. And I think it's really, really important for us to continue to share our stories. We did a Black History Month panel with different Black leaders across the organization recently, just to tell their stories, because that connection that their stories will bring, you know, hearing about them, understanding, oh, this is my teammate. Oh, this is her career. This is how her growth is. Oh, it's similar to mine in this way. Those connections help us build that trust and help us be believed when an act of discrimination, racism, anything's violated our space. Our voices could be heard. You know, when I look back and I was preparing for this panel, you know, women are the ones who drove all these social justice movements. It's women who did it, Black women in particular for the civil rights movement. And, you know, we are the ones that are being, you know, kidnapped on the side of the road and God knows what's happening to us. We are the ones that are threatened. If you say, you know, the rest of us aren't going to believe you, I'm going to make sure you're not believed. And of course, throughout the history, that's what happens now in 2024, when something happens to us, it's like, oh, no one's going to believe me, so I'm not going to say. So I think that that's what a lot of the struggle is with HR. So let's hire more people of color within human resources. Again, taking that CHRP certification, I'm trying. You know, understanding our rights, knowing that racism is a violent, you know, act towards us, and, you know, build that community to help us be heard through our human resources department so that we can kill this at the corporate Canada stage, and give the Human Rights Commission the time that it needs to take on more and more cases and to change the law for us. I'll stop there because I can go on forever. Like Lavinia, I could just talk about these things forever, so I'll stop.
Thank you so much. Thank you. There are a couple questions that I'd like to throw out to the group at this time. One, many of our Black lawyers are losing their license in Canada. It appears that they're facing discrimination. Any comments from the panelists?
Yeah, I think I'll hop in here. The issue is that anti-Black racism doesn't just exist for a certain socioeconomic class, for certain types of Black people, to the exclusion of others. It happens to us all. From you occupy Black skin, from you have the telltale afro, which obviously I'm biased with fine natural hair rocks. I love afros and curls. But you know, all fun things aside, if you identify as Black, you are going to have the experience of a Black person. And being in a Eurocentric society that, you know, forever cements and crystallizes that superiority, that white superiority complex, it absolutely exists in the legal profession. So what does that look like in actuality? One, it looks like more sole practitioners who are Black and who are being really rung through the ringer as it relates to the bylaws, the regulations of running a practice. Number two, when they are in trouble, it looks like, you know, really harsh penalties, which we see in the criminal justice system. We see in healthcare with, you know, very negative outcomes for Black women, bringing it back to Black women. And then number three, we see, you know, a lack of support because relatively speaking, as a community, we're very new to this profession here in Canada, right? Relatively speaking, I don't think there has ever been in history this many Black licensees, Black lawyers, Black paralegals. And so we're still navigating it. We're still understanding that system and we're still developing our support systems as well. Shout outs to Cable and BFLN and all the wonderful things that exist for Black licensees. But as I hope I have illustrated, it absolutely is anti-Black racism, systemic discrimination operating in the legal system. And there's been very, very ugly examples of it. There was an entire campaign against, you know, just the wonderful notion of identifying that lawyers need to respect the fact that inclusion, diversity, and equity is here to stay. There was an entire, like, I think it was called Stop Can or Stop SOP. Stop stands for SOP. SOP stands for Statement of Principles. Stop SOP stands for Stop Statement of Principles. And there was an entire group of lawyers who are not Black, majority not Black, who banded together to prevent equity from happening. This is happening in 2024. And so I don't say that to, you know, shine negative light or, you know, poo-poo the profession or anything like that. But I do say it to draw attention to the fact that this is a real issue. So for anyone who thinks that, you know, there's lawyers, you know, there's a wonderful justice right here, Justice Ivory, we're here, and that means that we're not experiencing it. That's absolutely not true.
So what I'm hearing is that anti-Black racism does not discriminate against Black people at any level of the society. Thank you so very much for that passionate response. The next question I'd like a response to is, can you pursue two avenues at the same time, union and employment law?
I can answer that. So yes. So what happens is you can, for instance, if there's a union mechanism that you're going through, you can also, because you have certain timelines to file your Human Rights Tribunal case, you can hold it in abeyance until your union matter is dealt with. But you can't simultaneously seek the same remedy, right? So it would be that the union is taking care of one particular aspect and maybe there's something else that's still left over when it's all said and done that you still want to pursue at the Human Rights Tribunal, so you can do so. But you can't kind of piggyback and do the same thing in two different jurisdictions. So you can, and sometimes, because you just want to be able to ensure that your rights are protected. So maybe the union doesn't do what you need it to do, or maybe it does, and so then you just file you dismiss the case that's at the Human Rights Tribunal, and then you just don't pursue that. But yes, you can, and probably should, just to ensure that all your bases are covered.
Thank you for that, Rochelle. I hope that helps. One of the things that I notice is that if there is a grievance at the union level, and there is a complaint at the OHRC, sometimes the union will wait for the OHRC simultaneously. It seems not to occur at the same time. And sometimes the OHRC will be asking, have you filed a union grievance and what was the results? So I think there may be some flexibility and elasticity in how that's dealt with. And we were asked, what would you say to someone who is feeling discrimination in the workplace, but does nothing for fear losing their job? So we're talking about reprisal here. Also, is it deliberate thinking that a Black person has no? So let me do the first one first. And basically, the first question is about reprisal. And can somebody respond to that, please?
Yeah, I can, and then anyone else could take it, because that's one of the reasons why we never put in our complaints, right? Because we're like, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? And we, again, Black women, caretakers, take care of our home, a lot of us single moms, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a true fear, and it needs to be acknowledged. But to Judge Ivory's point at the beginning, right? Like, if we don't speak up, if we don't, share what is happening, the impact won't come. And so I don't want to tell you, go ahead and do it, and don't worry about losing your job. The fact is that it's a long fight. So even if we sue for wrongful dismissal, it's going to take some time as it goes through the court systems, or if we go through the human rights. So you really have to know your situation, your particular situation, and what it is. But at the end of the day, discrimination against you at work is unlawful. And as such, we need to do something about it. So, while you want to maybe strengthen your case, again, find that circle of trust, people who could support you, resources outside of the workplace that can offer you advice so that you can document your situation. That's what I would say for the first answer to that. And I don't know if my other colleagues here want to add on to it.
I'll hop in. So as it relates to reprisal, I think what's important to be understood here is that's a separate cause of action. So if you have an initial situation that occurred that was discrimination, racism, there's that. And then if you address that in the workplace, which is your human rights, and you return to the workplace and you're being treated differently, you have maybe reduced job functions, you've dropped in seniority, now you're like, really feeling like the office scapegoat. Again, that all of those things would be a form of reprisal, and it's a separate cause of action. So in terms of navigating that, so many times people just don't know. There are a lot of free legal resources right here in Ontario. There's the Black Legal Action Center, there's Legal Aid Ontario, there's the Human Rights Legal Support Center. If you don't have, access to any of that, or perhaps you want something that is more legal law firm in nature, there are a ton of law firms. I do that work as well at Bernardi Human Resources Law. If you need that support, right? But I mean, ultimately speaking, as it relates to anti-Black racism and discrimination, I truly come from the thought process that you shouldn't have to pay for something that is inherently you, right? Like, why do you need to pay these crazy legal fees for an inherent characteristic? And so that's the reason why I prioritize those items that I mentioned before. So just to make sure that you're catching that point, the boiled down point, if you are experiencing any of the things I just mentioned, there are free resources available to you. Black Legal Action Center, there's the Human Rights Legal Support Center, and then Legal Aid Ontario.
Can I just add one more thing? The other thing as well is that sometimes something happens. You can address that, as Tiana had said earlier, you can address that with your management, with whomever. I had a personal experience that I'll share very quickly. When I first started teaching in the post-secondary system, my associate dean had come to me with, some comments about negative comments from students. And I had already been documenting the amazing things I've done. I've always sent them. Every time I get some kind of accolade from a student, I send that through. And so when he wanted to address those things with me, I pulled up a study that talks about the fact that Black women are always complained about and differentially receive negative comments. I let him know I do not want to be measured by that. And it's not fair to me to be measured by that, given what you know I've experienced and given what you know to be true. And so it's never been a factor ever since. Right? So these are things there are studies. I was going to say that the Ontario Human Rights Commission also has a number of studies that have been done on anti-Black racism. There's currently a study that was done by the Senate actually on the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, but can be extrapolated, the Canadian Human Rights Commission, that can be extrapolated all the way down about anti-Black racism within the system itself. And so we can utilize a lot of the case law that's out there, a lot of the studies that have been out there that can help us to be able to advance our needs and to support our ask. Even if we don't necessarily have the support of people, you might be the only, right? So you can utilize some of those resources as well.
Thank you. There is a legal test for reprisal.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, reprisal is a form of discrimination. Mm-hmm. So it's important. Earlier, when we talked about the fact that you need to know your rights, that's important for you to know. The next question is it deliberate thinking that a Black person has no feelings and that the same job they did for years, when they have resigned, the same job is given to 3 white persons?
So meaning that, because of what someone unfortunately has the stereotype of who we are, that it's been given to, I think that it's valid. I think, systemic racism is what it is. And it's because of us human beings and our brains that are wired to think so unnaturally. So I do believe that there is a stereotype and a belief, like for Black women, for example, the reason why we're not believed is because they're just an angry Black woman, right? Mm-hmm. Like so many articles have been written about that. And so we get, dismissed. I cannot hire her because of this, and this is what will happen, these sort of negative stereotypes. So I do believe that there is this, unaddressed belief of negative stereotypes that folks in organizations have of Black people and Black women. And as such, we aren't acknowledged for the jobs that we are doing because we're just another sort of number that, they don't see us as human beings with feelings, et cetera. I think there is a piece of that is very true and that causes us to lose jobs that we're very much entitled to, 100%. And so again, it's about addressing these negative stereotypes and building that culture of trust. And what I say is that we really need to make people uncomfortable because we have to unlearn what we have learned in order to change the systems.
Thank
My
you.
2 cents.
Thank you so very much. I think, we have to look at intersectionality in a more serious light going forward. As Black women, we experience a particular type of racism.
Yep.
They call it misogyny, a particular type of hatred. And so we need to harm ourselves more effectively as to how we walk through those workspaces and how we take up places and space. It is our right.
Absolutely.
Mic drop.
Yeah, 100%.
So the next question goes to Judge Avery. What can you expect the process will be like if you pursue a claim?
So I think that most people need to recognize that in a tribunal context, 95% of matters settle. So it's really important to understand that. Now, it's going to be a lengthy process regardless. Like this is, we're dealing with bureaucracy. We're dealing with, tribunals are it's one of the busiest tribunals in the province. And so it's going to be a lengthy process, simply because there are backlogs and things like that. But that being said, most matters settle. So it's important to understand that, because there will be a heavy encouragement to settle your matter. And so, it doesn't mean that you can't get what you want, but then it's also that at times, you almost want it to be documented somewhere so that, right? So that it's now a precedent that other people can then utilize. So that's important to recognize that, that most matters settle. The other thing is that, and we've touched on this a little bit, in that, you can address the harm that's been caused in a multitude of ways. You can ask for them to do an investigation. You can ask for policy development and training. You can ask for things that, and so to really think about, now that we've exercised our right, what do we need in order to repair the harm? And when you talk about, Nancy, the fact that racism is violence, and it is trauma, and we can have PTSD from our experiences. So when we're talking about repairing harm, this is what we also need to address. It's very important that we really do some introspection about what it is that we actually want. And if you have good legal representation, they normally ask you what it is that you actually want, and they can canvass with you a lot of what I've already said. But it's important that you kind of really think about what is it that I want out of this. I had a friend who went through a situation who, at the end, they were offering her job back. She's like, I don't care that you've done an investigation, that you've now recognized that, yes, I was discriminated against, that, yes, you were trying to constructively dismiss me by taking away some of my duties. I don't want to be back in this environment. And I don't want to be a part of your rebuild in order to address this harm and so that other people don't experience it. What I want, however, is for this not to happen to someone else, but I'm not going to be a part of that process. And that is also okay. And so it's really that we have to think about what it is that we want in order to kind of identify how the harm will really be repaired for you as an individual. And then the other thing is that, and we touched on this as well, that, retaliation for pursuing your rights is also a violation. You talked about the 3-part test, Nancy, and so I thought, let me just let people know what it is. It says the following will establish that someone experienced reprisal based on a code ground. An action was taken against or a threat was made to the claimant. The alleged action or threat was related to the claimant having claimed or trying to enforce a code right. And the third is that there was an intention on the part of the respondent to retaliate for the claim or to attempt to enforce the right. It actually says that to claim reprisal, a person does not have to show that their rights were actually infringed, right? So know that, yes, there are going to be some people who are not going to be happy that you filed your claim. Know that there's a possibility that they might try to now constructively take away some of your responsibilities. Know that it's going to possibly be a challenge. And so how do you fortify yourself in order to prepare yourself for that journey? That will not be a 6-month journey, but will be a lengthy journey.
Thank you so very much. So I just want to go back and just thank Vera and Rochelle for those 2 very strong questions that enabled us to go a little bit deeper. I have another question here, and that's from Donna. There is the issue of culture and language discrimination. So this does not have to be amongst Black people. How can this be dealt with when you feel excluded or languages are being spoken that you don't understand?
I feel like I need more clarity on the question.
Yeah, I was about to say, Nancy, can you repeat it one more time? I'm absorbing it.
Sure. I'm going to break it into 2 because I think there are 2 pieces here. One, maybe you could first respond, how does language get taken up in the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal?
So normally, so there's a lot of intersection to a lot of these issues. So that's what's most important. It could be that someone has an accent. It could be that, you know, your first language is another language, of course. And so then, and there is kind of like this discourse where if you, now let's say you have a colleague that also speaks the same language as you. And so now you're speaking the same language to each other, that other people feel otherized, right? And then now they are going to not allow you to kind of live your authentic self within your place of employment. And I think that, you know, but normally it's also wrapped up into citizenship or ethnic origin or into some of these other grounds, right? Because they're all very interconnected, but not the same thing. And so, you know, I think, again, the most important thing is you're documenting what's happening to you. I hate that I have to tell people to document, but that is really the most important thing to do. Does it mean that you're going to end up with a human rights complaint? No, not necessarily. But I can tell you that management needs to know what is happening for them to be able to address regardless. So yeah, there are a lot of nuances related to even like culture. It could be that, you know, somebody complains about your food stinking or anything like that. Like there's all sorts of different things that can happen, right? Mm-hmm. That's all, and again, that's all I believe caught up into other code grounds that kind of intersect. They have nexus with each other, and so it's important to recognize that you should be able to be your authentic and true self in your place of employment. And that's the most important thing. Because if you can't be your authentic and true self, and, you know, Lavinia had spoken to that about your hair and your clothing, you should, like, the reason why I have my hair in locks and I wear my hair in various styles all the time on purpose, because I recognize that as somebody who, there's only one Black citizenship judge in all of Canada. And the fact that she has locks and the fact that I make sure that I wear cultural clothing speaks to the fact that that is okay in various environments, right? And I wrap my head sometimes in my gowns. Like I make sure that I do these things because I want to ensure that other people know that this is okay and you can be your true self. And so I think that that's really fundamentally important, that you should be able to be your authentic self in your place of employment. And when there are things that now prevent you from doing so, we now have to address those things. Doesn't necessarily mean you're headed to the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal, but it could.
Mm-hmm. I think you're amazing, honestly, and that is our power right there. So thank you so much for saying and doing that. And I think I will just add one more thing. In corporations, you need to teach cultural humility. It is a big deal. I did a couple of those stints in different divisions in my organization when I was in EDI, because you have to teach people. We're a huge multicultural society, especially in Ontario, and Toronto is where I work. We are not a minority at all. And as such, cultural humility is a thing. And so I think that's also a good basis to help with the different culture discrimination, language discrimination, et cetera.
I think that's really empowering what you said as well, because even within like community, you know, I'm always hopping into what's happening in social media spaces. And there are conversations about, you know, traditionally Black hairstyles not being welcomed in certain spaces. So for you to say, Justice, that you're wearing your hair, your head wrap and your locks and you're Afrocentric and you're you in all your amazingness of your authenticity in your robes at that, like, that is so powerful. And so it's just so reassuring, even as like a fellow, you know, member of the bar, as a licensee, a lawyer, I feel so much more seen and that much more empowered as a community. And that's going back to Tianda's point, like that's why we need our community, right? We need each other to strengthen each other in these spaces, because it's very lonely. It could be very lonely. And it's very traumatic, to use your words, Justice, extremely traumatic. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That loneliness doesn't stop there. There's a question from Christine Macklin, and she says, what supports would you each recommend for someone who's going through these processes? Many people feel alone going through the process.
First thing,
Also-
take care of yourself.
Go ahead,
That's all I'm
Tiana.
gonna say.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just wanted to throw that in the silence
Yeah.
moment. The first thing, take care of yourself first, know your strength, and then next step, throw it over to you, Judge.
Yeah, like I just think that, we need to normalize therapy.
Yep.
We need to normalize that we need therapy and that we need that type of support. And I think sometimes it can be freeing when it's somebody who you don't really know and who you're not even going to be, having to encounter on a daily basis, that you can talk through your issues. But the other thing is that in many cases, we think that we're alone and we're actually not. We don't share our stories, as Tianda had said. We don't share that we've gone through things like this. And I think that it's really important that, one, you have friends that really will pour into you during a time like this. But I also think that it's really fundamentally important to also, like, even though you don't know that there are other people who are going through this. So you're not alone in truth, because there are a number of matters that go through the Human Rights Tribunal. There are a number of actions that are currently taking place. Black employees in the federal public service have a class action right now. There's a number of people who are experiencing this with you and who, even though they don't even know you, are supporting you right now. But I would also just say that self-care and getting therapy is really, really important to help you through this process. And the other thing is if you have legal representation, they can be somebody who can provide you with that empathy and maybe even direct you to supports, or even a former client who they might be able to connect you with. There's confidentiality issues, obviously, but just sometimes, when you've been through a process, sometimes, as legal representatives, we understand that there's somebody who I know that they can support you, or that they have lived through this, and you can reach out and say, do you mind connecting with my client, because I think that it's really important.
Thank you so very much. And there's a question from Lavinia, and this seems to have come from the folks who are joining us online. What were the free resources you mentioned for legal support, especially if your income is high?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So you're absolutely right to be concerned about the income piece, because Legal Aid Ontario, Black Legal Action Center, Human Rights Legal Support Center, they all have various different metrics to determine whether or not you do in fact make too much to be provided those services. While I can't say off the top of my head exactly what those tariffs might be, I would say don't count yourself out. So go ahead, ask those questions, make those phone calls, because it's better to hear the no or the pointed into a different direction from these services than to tell yourself that and maybe there's a nuance, or maybe there's something that you can, another avenue. There's always a way, right? So I hope that answers that. Yes, I'll leave that there. That's a fantastic question, though. Thank you. I think that came from Rochelle. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Maybe I could add that there are also community legal clinics, and they do not have a limit as to your capacity to access them, not based on your income. So that's another area that you might want to consider.
So I used to work with the predecessor to Black Legal Action Center, that was African Canadian Legal Clinic. And at that clinic, we did not have a amount of money that you were making too much to have, to access services rather. And the reason for that, the thought around that, the logic was that you shouldn't have to pay for anti-Black racism. Like, that's absolutely ridiculous. Now, I don't know if that's the case for Black Legal Action Center, but I just wanted to further cement that point. Still reach out, let them say no to you, don't say no to yourself.
Right, absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you. So we have a bit of time, and there's a question here. What are the types of remedies? I know, Judge Avery, you touched on them, but maybe to sort of just list, what are some of the remedies available to a person who files a claim with the HRTO?
So, of course, there's a monetary remedy that can be afforded to you. Keep in mind, you're not going to make millions of dollars ever. And it's normally based on precedent. So, if somebody else has had a very similar matter, there's a ballpark figures, right? And it's probably lower than you think. So just keep that in mind. Now, the other thing is that, however, if you've had to be out of pocket for things, you can be reimbursed for things that you've been out of pocket for. If you've missed work, even if you've had to get therapy and you want your therapy paid for or what have you. So you can get compensation for that. The other thing is you can ask for an apology. You can ask for it to be printed in a publication. You can ask for them to do an investigation. You can ask for them to create new policies addressing the issues that had been dealt with. You can ask for certain people or even the entire organization to get training. You can even identify the type of training that you'd like for them to take. That can be part of the remedies. In a lot of cases, it's also reinstatement of your position. So if you've lost your job, you can ask for your job to be given back to you. And then, of course, we've already talked about the fact that there shouldn't be any retaliation and you should not be facing any type of differential treatment when you now come back to work. And so there's a number of things. And I always will tell my students, and also when I was practicing, to kind of think outside of the box as well in terms of repairing the harm, because I'm giving you some examples here, but there could be, like when I used to do restorative justice work, the things that we would come up with were individual to that particular situation. Right. So similarly in the HRTO, it's what's particular to you. And so that's why that conversation about repairing the harm and what you need in order to feel well, in order for you to feel that you can now move forward, is a very individualistic thing and something that you really have to canvas and look at. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any cross comments that need to be made? Deonda, a final
No,
word?
just
Distinctly final word.
you're too funny, Nancy. I love you. I strongly believe in that, before I got into this work, it was always about, I needed to understand who I was as a human being in order to understand how I was going to move forward with this work. And I always tell people, like, you really have to be self-aware. You need to understand how you're going to show up, how you're going to react, because, anxiety is a thing. And from a person who suffers several panic attacks, it's just not fun. And so there's a lot of things you've got to do to ensure that you have the strength to take it the long way, because it's gonna take some time. And I think a lot of the work that we do, people want to see immediate results, and it does. Sometimes it's not immediate, and sometimes it's not the resolution that you assumed it would be. And so I do tell people to take care of themselves a lot before going down the road, because you just don't know what the result would be. But you got to keep fighting for what's right.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. We have about 2 minutes. Maybe we could, between Rochelle and Lavinia.
I was just going to quickly just say that, it's also important to ask questions. Like, some of the information that I have found out about the differential treatment that I've received is by talking to my colleagues who aren't racialized, to understand what their lived experience is. To understand if you've been treated differentially, you have to know what the status quo is. And so it's really important that you do have relationships with people in your place of employment or what have you, whatever entity, that you can say, so what do you experience? Do you experience this? And when they tell you no, because more than likely it's not, then it's something that you can now confirm. It's not just that you feel, you now know it to be true. And I think that that's really fundamentally important as well.
Thank you. And before we move over to Lavinia for final words, just want to let the audience know that towards the end of the session, we're going to be having a wonderful and amazing surprise. So we're asking you to stay right to the end. Thank you. Lavinia, your final words?
Yeah. I don't know what to add to that amazing thing that Justice just said. Very tough act to follow, but I think the main piece here is that human rights are accessible to you. They're a lot more accessible than you might think. And there are resources available. There's so many free resources available. If you feel like something is happening, document away. Oh, I wanted to add to that piece. So like just piggybacking the documentation bit, it could be as easy as, making sure that your conversations that you have with whoever the individual is via email. Like, if you're having very difficult, right? Like that's golden because it's like you've got the person who did it, you have the time, you have all the details, and it's right there and it's in black and white for anybody to see who needs to see it if you are before a justice, right? Or in a tribunal. So there's that. There's your phone, right? Everybody has a phone now. You can take pictures if you need to. Recording, there are some nuances around that, but email, I think, is the easiest way, especially in workplaces.
I actually told a colleague of mine to do just that the other day, Lavinia.
Yeah,
I'm like,
yeah.
he texted you, keep that text.
You're right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Thank you all so very much. Again, I want to announce Tionda Kerr, Lavinia Latham, and Judge Rochelle Every. Thank you. That was rich and deep. I'm leaving with increased understanding in 3 areas. One, not to be afraid of reprisal. And that's easier said than done. Nevertheless, I have to be courageous. Second, find my village, that circle of trust, build a community, seek therapy if I need to. Now, sometimes, therapy can be expensive, but as Judge Ivory says, when you go to the tribunal and if you're thinking about settlements, you can ask for therapy fees. I've done that on behalf of folks and I've been highly successful. People are more likely to want to do that than to give you a whole bunch of cash. And in regards to remedies, and we all have an accent. Quite often, language and accent will fall under one of those 5 grounds that I listed earlier: race, nationality, ancestry. Yeah, one of those 5, I think there are. So know that there's always a place for you to seek support and help. The tribunal doesn't quite use the word microaggression, and I am very critical of it. But what I can lend to you is that most times when people come forward with an allegation of microaggression, it's downright racism. So don't be afraid to question and poke, as Judge Everett told you earlier. Ask questions. And so deep appreciation to the audience for joining and communing with us today. Thank you, Donna Simmons, for all you do. And thank you, Malcolm Edwards, for the brilliant IT job. We are now moving on to the surprise.